Yes, Your Honor. May the prosecutor introduce themselves?
Yes.
My name is Charlie Stock, and I'm joined at council table today by my co-counsel, Ms. Theodora Shabana.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
And Special Agent Morgan DeVito.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
We represent the United States government.
So,
Would you like to hear appearances from the defense?
yes, it's good defense appearances, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Arabella, Loera, and I, along with Lydia Art. Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Represent the defendant, Mr. Blake Crosby.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Any pre-trial matters?
We do have a couple, Your Honor. Today we're going to be using a forensic report and the affidavit of an eyewitness, both stipulated to be admissible without objections. We move to admit them now.
Is that correct, defense?
Yes, Your Honor, without objection.
Then it's in evidence at this time.
Your Honor, this is the first time we're in the vault courtroom today, so we'd ask your preferences for movement about the well when approaching witnesses, opposing counsel, and the bench.
But don't feel locked up in the vault. I want you to move around as much as you feel like you need to effectively present your case to the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to take note that both witnesses who will be testifying today will be present all throughout trial. We would like to constructively swear in those witnesses now.
And defense, any objection to that?
Pursuant to Federal Rule 603, we have no objection.
Okay, everyone's sworn in.
And that's it from the prosecution, Your Honor. We're ready for opening statements.
All right, anything pre-trial from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. First, we do have several pretrial documents that we'd like to provide you with reference throughout this trial. It includes the pretrial order with evidentiary rulings and stipulation, jury form with the instruction, and also the Federal Rules of Evidence. The government's counsel has seen these documents for to approach and tender.
You've seen this?
We have.
All right, any objection to me getting them?
No, Your Honor, that's fine.
All right, we're going to approach.
Next, Your Honor, we would like to direct your attention to the stipulations page, specifically the second page of those stipulations. You'll see that pursuant to stipulation 17 and 18, that both parties have agreed that if Harper Edwards or Gray Judd do not testify at trial, the parties waive all objections to the admissibility of exhibits 9, 17, and 18.
Can these people testify?
They are not, Your Honor.
Right. Is that how you understand it?
One of those exhibits was actually just moved into evidence, Your Honor. The other, we also have no objection.
Okay. And these people are testifying?
They are not testifying. However, their affidavits are assumed to be admissible without objection.
All right. That's fine.
Next, Your Honor, we'd like to direct your attention to stipulation 22, which states that the parties agree that the defendant has one firearm registered to the defendant's name that is not sized to fire a 7.62 cartridge.
Okay, and government, is that how you understand that stipulation?
We do acknowledge that stipulation.
All right. Understood.
Last, Your Honor, for purposes of this trial, our understanding that the local rule is that objections are made in constructive sidebar outside of the jury.
That's correct.
With that, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed.
All right. With that, pre-trial matters being handled, we'll hear an opening statement from the government. Please direct all your argument and statements to the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. Please, court. Counsel. Members of the jury. To avoid the ballot, he used a bullet. It's July 4th, 2022. U.S. Senator and presidential candidate Thomas Capella is hosting a political rally just a few blocks from where we are now. He's surrounded by thousands of supporters and potential voters. He's about to make his case to become the next president of the United States of America. He steps up to the podium and he begins his speech. But less than 1 minute into that speech, a gunshot rings and the senator's head snaps back. A bullet straight through his forehead, and he collapses on the stage. 600 yards away on the rooftop of a nearby hotel is the defendant. He's wearing all black. A bullet on the ground by himself. A sniper in his hands. To avoid the battle, he used the bullet. You see, members of the jury, what you're going to learn today is that U.S. Senator represented everything the defendant despised. They were on opposite sides of the political spectrum, and what you'll learn is that the defendant had choice words for the Senate. He's bad for this. He isn't corrupt. So long as that man is alive, no one's safe. So you'll learn that instead of allowing the voters in this country to decide their next president, the defendant decided to take matters into his own hands to avoid the battle. He used the bullet. That's why we're here today, members of the jury, as the United States government charging the defendant with murder. We got to prove two things. We have to prove that the defendant killed Thomas Capello and that the defendant did so intentionally. And that, members of the jury, is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to prove our case to you today beyond a reasonable doubt. We're going to do that by walking you through the mistakes that the defendant made, the physical evidence that the defendant left behind, the three key facts that tie the defendant and only the defendant to this crime: the sniper, the cigarette, and the shield. Let's take them one by one, starting with the sniper. Because members of the jury, you're going to learn that this presidential candidate assassination, it was not done from up close. We had a forensics team examine the body in the bullet hole. And what they found is that the shot came from 604 yards away. That's 6 football fields, members of the jury. You'll learn today that's not an easy shot. You'll learn it takes an experienced, trained sniper to hit a shot like that. The evidence will show that only one person had the training, experience, and skill necessary to hit that shot. Someone who was a sniper for 8 years. This defendant. So that brings us to the second fact, the cigarette. Because members of the jury, today you're going to have the opportunity to hear from the investigator in this case, Special Agent Morgan DeVico. Special Agent DeVico will tell you that he investigated the rooftop of that hotel. And when he did, he found physical evidence tying the defendant to this crime. He'll take this stand and he'll tell you that he found a sniper bullet, the same type of bullet that was found lodged in the senator's forehead. And right next to that bullet on the rooftop, a cigarette. You might be saying, so what, a cigarette? But members of the jury, you're going to learn this is not any cigarette. This cigarette was covered in gunshot residue, not just gunshot residue. It was covered with the defendant's fingerprints and the defendant's DNA. The defendant would be forced to admit that they lied to the FBI about that cigarette. So members of the jury, that brings us to the sheet. Because the evidence will show that the defendant, they did try to hide the evidence. Disassemble the sniper rifle, get rid of the parts. And you'll learn the defendant almost succeeded. But the defendant made one mistake. We interviewed the defendant. And during that interview, he let slip that he visited a restaurant after the shooting, a cheesecake restaurant called Leaders. So we did our due diligence. And you'll learn that we researched that restaurant. We visited and we looked for evidence. And we found it. Inside a trash can in that restaurant, a part to a sniper, a trigger sheet, specific to the same type of rifle that the defendant used as a sniper. Members of the jury, presidential elections are the bedrock of our democracy. The presidential vote is what ensures the voices of the American people can be heard. But members of the jury, at the end of this trial, it will be clear the defendant robbed that right of the American people. That's why at the end of this trial, I'm going to come before you again, and I'm going to ask you to cast your own vote. This And I'm going to ask you to vote for the only verdict consistent with the facts in this case. A verdict of guilt. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, counsel. Defense, do you have an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
You proceed whenever you're ready.
May it please the court. There are a few areas where we can agree with the prosecution. First, we can agree that Senator Thomas Capello was assassinated on July 4th, 2022 at 1:47 p.m. We can also agree that this shot was fired by a highly skilled marksman, possibly from the military, from a long distance away. And I'm sure that we can also agree that any attack on our political candidates is an attack on all of us, on our democracy. And when our democracy is attacked, it is necessary and natural to ask questions. Like, why did this happen? How did this happen? And how do we bring the right person to justice? Now you're going to hear from the prosecution that they will be unable to answer key questions. After you listen to the evidence, we submit that at the end of trial, you will be left with more questions than answers. Now let's think about what evidence you will hear about. The prosecution will be unable to present you with a murder weapon. They'll be unable to present you with any witnesses that placed Blake Crosby at the hotel around 1:47 p.m. when the shots were fired. Yet the prosecution bases its entire claim on the fact that Blake Crosby was ex-military. He was a highly skilled marksman and that he was staying at the Sonesta. So, therefore, he must be an assassin. But that's a big claim of the jury. You will hear from Blake Crosby himself. The defense has no burden of proof, but you will still hear his story. Members of the jury, this is Blake Crosby. He served this country. He earned a silver star from his time in Afghanistan. But you're also going to hear that Blake Crosby had a devastating fall from grace when an altercation with a private under his command led to a dishonorable discharge from the U.S. Army. You might ask yourself, why would Blake want to talk about that today? Well, as you listen to the evidence, it will be clear that Blake Crosby has nothing to hide. And despite this hiccup from the Army, you will learn that Blake Crosby is proud of his service. He wears his patriotism on his sleeve. And it's because of his devotion to the U.S. Army that he was not keeping quiet about his disdain for Senator Thomas Capello. You see, Blake Crosby saw Thomas Capello as someone who was anti-military, as someone who was not favorable to the military, to the servicemen that Mr. Crosby once was. But that doesn't make him a murderer. Members of the jury, the prosecution has the burden of proof in this case. They need to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Blake Crosby, one, ended the life of Thomas Capello, and he did so intentionally and deliberately. Keep in mind that beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest burden in our legal system, but the prosecution will fail. They will fail because the evidence is not there. They will fail because they will leave you with more questions than answers. At the end of this trial, you will still fail to be able to attach the evidence to Blake Crosby. Now, the prosecution told you that there was DNA evidence, that there was a cigarette butt found. But members of the jury, Blake Crosby has nothing to hide. He was a smoker. He admittedly smoked at the hotel that he was staying at, but that doesn't mean that he was there at the time of the crime. You're also going to hear about his skilled marksmanship. Admittedly, he was in the Army. But members of the jury, you're not going to hear any evidence that a witness saw Blake Crosby with a gun on the day of, or even in the 6 years since his military service. So what will you get? From the prosecution, you will get foregone conclusions. You see, the prosecution had a big job. They needed to find a culprit in a high-profile case, and because of the blemish on Blake Crosby's record, they started and ended their short investigation with only him. After all is said and done, and after you listen to the evidence, you will be left with more questions than answers. Therefore, at the end of trial, we will ask that you find Blake Crosby not guilty for murder.
Thank you, counsel. Governor, you're supposed to prepare to present your case in chief.
Yes, Your Honor, the government is. The government calls Morgan DeVito.
All right. Presume sworn. Begin your direct testimony whenever you're ready, counsel.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, counsel.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, everyone. My name is Agent Morgan DeVito.
Could you tell us what you do for it?
I'm a service agent. Work with the Secret Service. It's my job to protect very important people. I like to say I'm sort of like the black man in black.
What kind of training does it take to become a Secret Service agent?
Well, for me, I studied at the University of Chicago. Got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice, where I applied to become a Secret Service agent. After that, got promoted, moved through the ranks, protect very important political figures.
Sir, I want to talk about why you're involved in this case. Could you tell the members of the jury why you're here?
Of course. Last year, on July 4th, here in Philadelphia, I was present, working security for Mr. Thomas Capella during a speech he was giving. And he was shot.
Let's talk about your investigation into the shooting. First, could you tell us who Thomas Capella is?
Of course. Last year, Thomas Capella was a senator from California, but he ended up running for president. He was a third-party candidate with pretty high approval rates. He was giving a speech here in Philadelphia.
You said he was shot. When was he shot?
July 4th of 2022, around 1:45 p.m.
Could you tell the members of the jury what you saw that day around 1:45 p.m.?
Of course. Me and the other Secret Servicemen were standing guard until he started his speech around 1:46. And a minute later, at 1:47, I heard a faint gunshot. It hit Mr. Capella.
So I want to talk about who might have fired that bullet. Do you have any idea where that bullet might have come from?
We do. Immediately after an event like that happens, we began our investigation. We got a hold of a forensics report from our forensics team, looked at the angle of the bullet as well as the autopsy. We narrowed down the possible locations of the shooter to some hotels in Philadelphia.
Did you get any useful information from any of those hotels?
We did. There was one hotel within the range we predicted, the Sonesta Hotel, where we found some evidence that we thought was related to the shooting.
What evidence did you find?
Well, two things. The receptionist from the hotel later that day actually called us, informed us that they believed they saw someone go to the rooftop about an hour before Mr. Capella was shot. We also find two pieces of physical evidence, a bullet on the top of that roof, as well as a cigarette.
Let's break those down, starting with that hotel clerk you mentioned. What did that hotel clerk have to say about that person that they saw trying to get up to the rooftop?
They informed me that one of the guests that was staying at the top floor was seen dressed in all black, carrying a bag, going to that rooftop shortly before Mr. Capella was shot.
Was that clerk able to identify that person?
She was. We showed her a photo array of all of the people staying on that floor. She described and identified the defendant, Mr. Crosby.
Did she say how certain she was that the person she saw trying to get up to that rooftop was the defendant?
She said 100%.
Do you see the defendant in the courtroom today?
I do. Sitting right over there at the end of the table with the yellow tie.
The record reflects the witness has accurately identified the defendant.
The record shall say the fact.
Sir, I want to talk about those pieces of physical evidence you said you found in this case. Could you remind the members of the jury what those were?
Well, there were two things we found on the rooftop of that hotel. A bullet, as well as a cigarette.
Let's break those down. Where exactly on the rooftop did you find that bullet?
On the south wall of the rooftop, on the ledge, we saw a bullet that was the same type of bullet we found in Mr. Capello.
I'm approaching the witness with Exhibit 5. Do you recognize this?
Yes, this looks just like the bullet we found on the roof.
Prosecution moves to enter Exhibit 5.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 5 is in evidence.
Sir, did you find any evidence that the defendant was familiar with that type of sniper bullet?
We did. We interviewed Mr. Crosby shortly after the incident. He informed us that he was a U.S. Army sniper. And this was the same kind of bullet he used when he was there.
You said that he was a U.S. Army sniper. How long was he a sniper?
He served for 8 years.
Do you know if he was any good as a sniper?
I do. He told me himself he was quite good. He told us he competed in multiple competitions for sniping. And he won first place 4 different times. And then he held the world record for bullseyes, 1,500 yards.
Let's talk about that second piece of physical evidence you found. You said you found a cigarette, is that right?
That's correct.
I'm approaching the witness with Exhibit 7. Do you recognize this?
Yes, this is the cigarette that we found on the roof.
Prosecution moves to enter Exhibit 7.
Any objection?
Pursuant to stipulation 12, Your Honor, no objection.
It's in evidence.
So why is cigarette important in this case?
Well, the cigarette was found very close to the bullet we found. It also had gunshot residue based on what our forensic teams are telling.
What's gunshot residue?
It's the metal fragments that are found on items around the area that a firearm has been fired.
Was gunshot residue the only piece of evidence you found on that cigarette?
No, sir. We found forensic evidence as well.
What kind of forensic evidence?
2 things. DNA that we matched, as well as fingerprints.
Who did that DNA and those fingerprints belong to, sir?
The fingerprints were a 16-point match for Mr. Crosby. The DNA was a 1 in 6.2 billion match.
Let's talk about other evidence that you found, sir. Were you able to find any other physical evidence in this case?
We were. We actually looked at one of the restaurants that was a few blocks from Rittenhouse Square, as well as the Sonesta Hotel, Cleavers, that was sold cheese sticks.
Why did you investigate a restaurant, Cleavers?
We were told by the owner of that restaurant that they found trigger shield inside of one of their trash cans. We hypothesized was the same trigger shield that the sniper rifle.
Where did the defendant tell you they visited immediately after the shooting?
Cleavers, to get a cheese stick.
Sir, I want to talk about why the defendant might have committed this crime. Motive. Before the shooting, what did the defendant have to say about the victim, Thomas Capello?
He was very vocal. He said that Senator Thomas Capello was a threat to everyone in the U.S. So that as long as Thomas Capello was alive, none of us were safe.
What did the defendant say it was time for?
Objection, Your Honor, deleting.
Any response?
Hey, the question is what, Your Honor? I'm not leading the witness to a certain answer.
Your Honor, if I may respond. That statement has not yet hit the record about what the witness said it was time for. That's leading to get to a very specific answer. That's not a broad question.
I'll sustain that. Just rephrase the question.
How did that tweet end?
At the end of the tweet, we talked about Senator Capello. He said it was time for patriots.
What did the defendant tweet just hours before Senator Capello was killed?
July 4th, he said it was Patriot Day.
What did the defendant say after the shooting about Thomas Capello?
During our interview, he said that Thomas Capello didn't care about the military, that he didn't care about Americans.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
Thank you, counsel. Is there cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. DeVico.
Good afternoon, counsel.
I want to start by talking about your experience.
Sure.
You're a special agent,
Secret Service agent for sure.
and your job is to protect candidates for political office, I should say.
Among many other things, yes,
And on July 4th, that's exactly what you were tasked with.
I was.
You were tasked with protecting Senator Thomas Capello.
Myself and other Secret Service agents were his security detail.
And you take your job very seriously.
Absolutely, ma'am.
You would say that there were thousands of people at the rally on July 4th, right?
Probably 10,000.
You yourself were in the crowd when Capello was shot.
I was.
Now, initially, you couldn't tell where where the shot was fired from.
No, ma'am. It sounded faint, and we've done security before the rally had started, and we didn't see anyone with a fire.
That's right. Because it sounded faint, you assumed that it was from further away.
That's exactly right.
And you said you did security before the rally started, right?
I did.
And you didn't notice anybody had a firearm.
Not that I could tell.
Now, there's also several buildings around Rittenhouse Square where the rally was held.
Right. Downtown Philly.
And it's your belief that the fire was shot from the rooftop of the Sonesta Hotel.
That's what the evidence told.
Well, I want to ask you about something that you said in your direct examination, Mr. DeVico. You said that there was only one hotel within range of the shooting. That was your testimony?
No, that's not true.
That's not true, but that was your testimony on direct examination.
No, it wasn't. We found a few hotels that were in that range, and we narrowed it down to one because it had the physical evidence on the roof.
So let's back up a little bit. There was more than one hotel within range of the shooting.
Right. And we investigated all of them, and only one had physical evidence on the roof.
You would recognize a copy of the area surrounding Rittenhouse Square where that rally was held.
I'm sure I would.
Your Honor, let the record reflect that I am approaching and showing opposing counsel what has been previously marked as Exhibit 3.
Okay.
Let the record reflect that I'm handing the witness the same. Mr. DeVico, you recognize this document?
Right. It's a Google map of the area where the shooting was, as well as the hotels.
It's a fair and accurate copy.
It's fair to me.
It hasn't been changed or altered in any way.
No.
Your Honor, the defense offers Exhibit 3 into evidence.
No objection. No objections to it. Bring it on. It's an evidence.
Permission to publish to the jury?
No.
So, Mr. DeVico, looking at this map, the purple circle indicates 2 hotels, right? Just to clarify.
All right. Those were 2 of the hotels in there.
Those weren't just 2 of the hotels in the area. Those were 2 hotels within range of the shooting.
Right. One of them is the Sonesta, and one is the Motto. I investigated both, and only one of them had evidence on the roof.
And there was also 3 other buildings in the same vicinity.
Right.
Now, I'd like to move on to your investigation. You've never investigated homicides before.
No, not personally, but as a Secret Service agent, it's my job to oversee these investigations and work collaboratively.
That's right. You worked collaboratively with the FBI for this case.
I did.
And you found Blake Crosby to be a person of interest.
It certainly was.
And Blake Crosby wasn't the only person at the rally that day.
No.
And you would say that your case against Blake Crosby was airtight, right? To use your words.
It is.
So let's talk about your airtight case. You reviewed forensic evidence.
That was part of it, of course.
And you found on top of the Sonesta Hotel a cigarette butt, right?
Yeah, right here.
And the evidence from that, DNA evidence, was linked to Blake Crosby.
Right. Very close match.
You would agree with me that, admittedly, Blake Crosby is a cigarette smoker.
That's what he told me in the interview.
And admittedly, Blake Crosby was staying at the Sonesta Hotel.
He said so.
Now, you also brought up the bullet vest in front of you.
That's right.
That was also found on the rooftop of the Sonesta.
Right next to that cigarette.
And just to back up for a moment, that wasn't the only cigarette that was found on the rooftop, right?
Right. There were a few others, but they were about 50 feet away. This one was the closest, and it also had his DNA on it.
So just to be clear, there was 3 other cigarettes on top of the Sonesta Hotel rooftop.
That's right. The hotel receptionist said that she went up there sometimes to smoke.
And now going back to that bullet, it didn't have any DNA evidence linked to it?
No.
No forensic evidence linked to it?
No.
Now, you mentioned on direct examination that you also found the trigger guard from the rifle that was used to shoot Senator Capello, right?
That's right.
That trigger guard didn't have any DNA evidence linked to it.
No, it didn't.
It didn't have any forensic evidence linked to it at all.
No.
Based on your review of this case, Mr. Crosby didn't own the rifle used to shoot Senator Capello.
I have no idea if that's true.
Well, based on your review, you didn't find anything that would suggest that he owned that rifle, right?
Not that we could find, no.
And to be very clear, you never even found the full murder weapon.
No.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
So the redirect from the government?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel just asked you about that trigger shield. So what kind of trigger shield was it?
It was a trigger shield for a military-grade sniper rifle, Steyr SSG-69.
Do you know if the defendant had experience with that specific type of rifle?
In the interview, he informed me that it was one of his favorites, that he was very familiar with.
Defense counsel said that the defendant has nothing to hide. Let's talk about whether that's true. Sir, before you showed DNA on that cigarette, what did the defendant have to say about that?
First, we asked him if he had been on a rooftop at any point that weekend. He said no. After we told him we had DNA evidence, he changed his story and admitted he had been there.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
Anything based on that, defense counsel?
Based on that, Your Honor, no.
All right. Thank you, Special Agent. May be excused.
Of course, Your Honor.
Any further witnesses from the government?
Before we rest our case in chief, Your Honor, we've asked him to exhibit 11 into evidence. It's a picture of the video.
And is there any objection to that from the defense?
Pursuant to stipulation, Your Honor, we have no objection to the trigger shield being entered.
Okay, exhibit 11 can be entered into evidence.
Permission to publish exhibits that are up there and this exhibit to the jury?
Yes, please. And I believe this may be defense counsel's exhibit 3 there. We'll clean that up with the next witness here on the table, please.
Yes, Your Honor.
And with that, Your Honor, the prosecution representation.
All right. Now, you know, the court's on a tight schedule, so we've been instructed to keep moving. If there's anybody who desperately need a break anywhere, all right, we'll keep moving. Defense, you have your case in chief, any evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Blake Crosby.
Right. Presume sworn. To begin your direct whenever you're ready, defense counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Please state your name, spelling the last for the record.
Hi there. My name is Blake Crosby. That's Crosby.
Mr. Crosby, what do you do for a living?
Well, I've worked a lot of jobs as of late. I mean, I worked at the post office, worked for Amazon, but couldn't really keep anything down. So right now I'm self-employed. I'm an Uber driver.
And what did you do before becoming an Uber driver?
I served in the U.S. Army for 8 years.
Did you win any awards while you were serving in the Army?
I did. I served in Afghanistan, and I won the Silver Star.
Objection, Your Honor. Pursuant to character evidence, may I be heard? Okay. This evidence is being used for its defense to show that he won an award in the past act or for content associated with acting peacefully, that he would act peacefully on the day in question. We're using it for defense, Your Honor. That's inadmissible pursuant to the report.
Any response?
Your Honor, it's our understanding that because this evidence has already hit the record, that opposing counsel will be using the same evidence of his background in the military against him. So as the defense, we have that right to rebut the evidence coming in.
All right, response. You have a response, and then that counsel saying you open the door.
Your Honor, this was stated in the defense's opening statement. Nowhere else today throughout trial has this information been stated. The door has not been opened, and currently they're using it for its propensity.
I have heard some evidence about his background. How is this different?
Your Honor, this goes specifically to traits of peacefulness. Just because someone has a background in the military, that's different from winning a Silver Star, conduct associated with peacefulness. Backfill documents for the propensity, the background information, his experience with a sniper, that is being used to establish knowledge, not being used for propensity. Those thoughts.
Yes, Your Honor. I would again say it's our belief that on cross-examination, prosecution's counsel is going to ask this witness about his military background and the circumstances that led to his dishonorable discharge. So we are laying the foundation for his background in the military, his knowledge, any awards that he gained from his time, just to explain to the jury.
If that happens, I'll allow you to request it and redirect. So that's just a statement.
Motion struck.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Crosby, why did you end up leaving the military?
It was the worst day of my life. I was dishonorably discharged. So.
What was your reaction to that?
The military was my life. I mean, I served for 8 years and I wanted to serve for 8 more. I made a mistake. I didn't tell the truth and I lost my family because of it. I regretted everything.
And Ms. Crosby, I'd like to talk to you about July 4th. Where were you on July 4th, 2022?
I was in Philadelphia that day. I'd gone there to protest Thomas Capello, who was running for president.
Why did you go to Philadelphia to protest Senator Capello?
Well, I didn't really like it, if I'm honest with you. I thought that he went against me and my brothers and sisters. He was anti-military. He wanted to defund the military. And as a veteran, I couldn't support that.
Have you gone to Capello rallies before?
Yes. He had released a whole big series of cities that he was going to go to. So me and my brothers, we went to all of them. I mean, we went back to back to back, city after city, just to try and make our voice heard.
Where did you stay in Philadelphia during this time period?
I stayed at the Sonesta Hotel. It's on Market Street.
Now, after checking into the Sonesta, excuse me, what day did you check into the Sonesta Hotel? Just to clarify the record.
Oh, that was July 3rd.
And after checking into the Sonesta on July 3rd, what did you do?
Well, no one else was really in town, so I hung around the hotel. I mean, I popped up to the roof for a smoke or two. It's a bad habit I caught while I was overseas, and that was about it for July 3rd. Yeah.
And how far is the Sonesta Hotel to the rally you went to on July 4th?
Not very far. I mean, less than a quarter of a mile, probably only 600, 500 yards, somewhere in there.
Would you recognize a copy of a Google Maps from that surrounding area with the Rittenhouse Square and the Sonesta Hotel presented to you?
Yeah, I would.
Your Honor, let the record reflect that I'm approaching Mr. Crosby with what has been already admitted into evidence as Exhibit 3. Now, Mr. Crosby, you recognize this document?
Yeah, I do. It's just a map of the area.
And in this map of the area, could you tell the jury what the purple circle is?
Yeah, I mean, the purple circle, I think is, I think that's around how far the shot came from. That's what I was told at least.
And what is within this purple circle?
Well,
building-wise?
There are 2 hotels. There's where I stayed, there's the Sonesta, and then there was the Motto by Hilton. That was another one.
I'll go ahead and take that back from you, Mr. Crosby. And Mr. Crosby, where were you when the shot was fired on July 4th, 2022?
Well, I had woke up early that day. I got breakfast, and then in the morning I went to the rally, and I was there the entire time. When that shot was fired, I was in the rally and in the crowd.
What time did the rally start?
It started around 1300, and then Mr. Capello, he came on stage at 13:45, and of course the shot was fired 2 minutes later.
And where exactly were you standing when the shot was fired?
Well, I was sort of near the park, but a little outside of it. I mean, I wasn't in the main crowd necessarily, but I was more on the fringes, yeah.
And Mr. Crosby, you were sitting in court today.
I was, yeah,
You were listening to the testimony.
I did.
You heard Special Agent DeVico testify.
I did.
You heard him say that the shot came from the Sonesta Hotel, right?
Yes,
Your Honor, we just asked that opposing counsel phrase for questions and format that is leading the witness to answer.
Just because we've heard it in court, I'm not allowing it.
Yes, Your Honor.
You heard Mr. DeVico say that the shot was fired within range from the Sonesta Hotel.
yes, I did.
Now, are you aware of the gun that was used to shoot and assassinate Thomas Capello?
Yes, I've heard that it was the type of rifle that I used while I was in the Army. It's a Tahj SSG-69, but it's just a sniper rifle. That's all it is.
Are you aware of the type of bullet that's compatible with that rifle?
Yeah, that's a NATO round. Both of those things are the most common type of sniper rifle and ammunition that we use in the Army.
Objection, Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 602 and lack of foundation. Have you heard? Yes. The witness just testified that that bullet and that sniper rifle were the most common type of sniper rifle. Currently, there's no foundation on the record as to how this witness would know that information. And until there is, Your Honor, the witness is speculating about what bullet is used most commonly. He hasn't even been in the military for the past year.
Your Honor, may I respond? Yes. During Special Agent DeVico's testimony, he said that based on the interview he conducted with this witness, that he acknowledged that this was the most common type of rifle used, and he is able to say that because of his experience that we've already covered from being in the military and specifically working as a sniper or marksman in that career.
Response, Your Honor? Yes. He can testify to what bullet he used most commonly, or what sniper he used most commonly, but to say that now it is the most common bullet and the most common rifle used, when he hasn't been in the military in years, is going too far. There's not foundation on the record for how this witness would know that information currently, and until there is, the witness is speculating.
Any other response to that?
Yes, Your Honor, I would just argue that this witness is speaking from a time of his military background and experience. He is not speculating or assuming anything about what's common most today, but in his case, that's what he knows is most common because that's his experience when he was in the military. That's the only thing that this witness is speaking to. And we would be fine with a limiting instruction to the jury saying just that.
What's the testimony on him when he was last in the military?
I'm sorry, what was that, Your Honor?
Is there any testimony about when he was last in the military?
Yes, that's at the record. It was about 6 years ago, was when he was discharged from the military.
Let's sustain the objection.
Motion is granted.
And I'll go ahead and rephrase, Mr. Crosby. From your time in the military, was this rifle common?
When I was in the military, yes.
And now, I want to ask you this. Could you tell the jury if you owned this type of rifle?
No. Ever since I left the service, I've never picked up. I just own a small handgun. I don't own any type of rifle.
And the handgun that you own is not compatible with the bullets that were found on July 4th.
Objection, Your Honor, lead.
Your Honor, there is no answer suggested in that question about whether or not his handgun is compatible with bullets.
Response,
It's okay. I'll sustain. I'll ask you to rephrase. Okay.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Crosby, what, if anything, do you know about the compatibility between the bullet found on July 4th and your own handgun?
They're not compatible. You couldn't shoot a NATO round from the little handgun that I have. I didn't even bring it to Philadelphia. No.
Thank you, Mr. Crosby. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
yes, Your Honor, permission to retrieve evidence for cross.
That's fine. What evidence are there?
The cigarette, the bullet, and the other.
All right.
Commissioner Chief.
Yeah.
Senator Capello is a threat to this country. Your words, isn't that right?
Yes, I said that.
So long as that man is alive, no one said that's what he said.
I did.
Said he's bad for this country.
In my heart of hearts, I believed it.
He said you don't want to be president.
Correct.
So that man didn't appreciate people like you.
I didn't think he liked me or my brothers and sisters.
That's a yes.
Yeah.
When he announced his campaign, you said, it's time for the Patriots. Didn't you?
I did.
And just hours before that man was shot, you sent out to your followers, it's Patriot. Isn't that?
That was July 4th.
So let's talk about your skills with the sniper rifle.
Okay.
Because, sir, you'd agree with me, it's not easy to hit a shot from 604 yards away from the target, is it?
No, I don't think I could do it.
You can't just pull someone off the street and ask them to hit that shot.
No, you can't.
It takes a skilled sniper to hit a shot like that.
It does.
An experienced sniper.
Yeah.
You, sir, are an experienced sniper.
I was when I was in the military first.
Your sole job in the military for 8 years was to shoot sniper rifles.
It was.
You were named the best sniper in the U.S. Army, weren't you?
I was, yes.
Not just once you won that title, 4 times you won that title.
I did, yes. I wanted to support right.
You consistently hit shots from further than 600 yards. Isn't that right?
I did, but it's not like riding a bike. You can't just pick it up and put it down. I can't hit those sort of shots anymore.
Well, I know that's what you're saying today, but you have to admit, Mr. Crosby, you hit those shots.
A while ago, I did.
And you would hit them on the bullseye every week.
Not every time, but yes, I hit those.
Let's talk about your familiarity with the sniper in this case. Now, you were here for the testimony of Agent DeVico, weren't you?
I was.
I'm holding up Exhibit 5. You heard this is the bullet that they found on the rooftop of your hotel.
Yeah, I heard that.
This isn't the first time you've seen a bullet like this, is it?
No.
You're familiar with this bullet.
I am.
This is the bullet you used with your sniper rifles.
Yes, it is.
This is the bullet you shot frequently. Isn't that right?
Yes, when I served.
I'm holding up Exhibit 11. Agent DeVico said they found this trigger shield to a sniper rifle. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Said he found this trigger shield and it's specific to an Austrian sniper rifle, right?
It is.
You said on direct it's the SSG-69.
Yes.
That's the sniper rifle that you used. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it is.
Your weapon of choice.
It's what we were issuing. Standard Army protocol.
Well, you specifically said you liked it because it was lightweight.
Yeah, I did.
It never jammed. And it was able to hit shots right every time.
From my experience, yeah.
Agent DeVico said that they found this trigger shield at a restaurant called Cleaver's. You heard that, didn't you?
I did.
Sir, what restaurant did you visit immediately after Thomas Capello was shot?
I didn't go to any restaurant immediately after.
In the hours following the shooting, what restaurant did you go to?
Sure. I mean, a couple hours later, before my crime, I did go to Cleveland.
So you're telling us you went to the exact same restaurant where the FBI found the trigger shield specific to the sniper rifle that you used in the military?
Yeah.
Defense counsel said on opening statement you have nothing to hide. Let's talk about whether that's true. Because, sir, you admit that you booked a room in the Sonesta Hotel, didn't you?
Yeah.
Booked that room on the top floor.
I did.
As close as you can get to the roof.
Yeah.
You insisted on that, didn't you?
I've never been to Philly. I didn't see the view.
You told the hotel clerk, put me right next to the staircase that leads up to the roof.
And next to the emergency exit.
You insisted on it.
I did.
You booked that room under a fake name, didn't you?
Yeah, I did that for all of the judges. Did that.
Every single time you went to the hotel, you told that hotel manager, my name is Pat Henry. Isn't that it?
Yeah, I did.
Your name isn't Pat Henry.
It's not.
You tried to hide your identity, didn't you?
From the hotel, sure.
You lied to the hotel.
Yeah, what my privacy?
Let's talk about whether you lied to the FBI. Because, sir, you heard that the FBI found this cigarette next to that bullet on the roof of your hotel.
Yeah, they did.
Cigarette covered in gunshot residue.
From what I heard.
They showed you the cigarette during your interview.
They did.
When you saw it, you said, I've never seen that cigarette before.
I did, yes.
You said, I've never touched it.
You're right.
I've never smoked it.
You're right.
You said, I have never been up on that rooftop. It can't be mine. That's what you said.
I did.
Then the FBI showed you your fingerprints on this cigarette. Isn't that?
Yeah, they said they had them.
Then the FBI showed you your DNA on this cigarette.
And that's when I said it was mine.
That's when you changed your story completely.
I mean, I was scared. I'd been up there the day before and the guy was killed from that roof. I didn't tell the truth, but I owned up to it.
That's a yes, sir. That's when you changed your story, when you were faced with evidence proving you were wrong.
Yeah.
You lied to the FBI.
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
This question hasn't been asked.
I'm gonna allow just one minute, okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
You lied to the FBI, didn't you?
I did.
Nothing further. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. May I just inquire how much time is left for redirect?
Absolutely. You have about 2 minutes. 2 minutes and 7 seconds.
Thank you. Arabella Loera for the defense. May I proceed, Your Honor? Mr. Cosby, the government just got up here and talked about your skills in the military. But what I want to ask you is, were you the only protester there on July 4th?
No, I mean, me and my brothers, we traveled together. There were lots of us vets in that crowd that day.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
One question refresh. Okay. Can you give us the names or contact information of any of your buddies that were there?
Well, there was Judd Gray.
Is it your testimony that you knew the names of the people you saw there?
I mean, I didn't know any of them. I just,
So what you told the FBI is you didn't know the names of them?
yeah, most of the people I met, I never even know.
So you didn't know them?
Almost everyone knows.
Nothing further.
The best I know.
Since there's no redirect, Your Honor,
Okay.
we just asked that.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Cosby. And defense, do you have any further arguments?
Nothing further, Your Honor, we rest our case in chief.
All right, I'll offer again, we've been told to keep moving, but if anybody really needs a break, we can do it. Totally fine with it. Seeing no takers, and we'll go ahead and proceed to closing arguments. Governor, whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Evidence Court. Counsel. Members of the jury, to avoid the fact he used to vote. He is a threat. He is bad for this country. So long as that senator is alive, no one's safe. Members of the jury, the defendant just took the stand and he gave you excuse after excuse after excuse on cross-examination, but those words, the words he spoke about that senator before, on the day of, and after the shooting speak far louder than any of the excuses he made on the stand today. Instead of using his voice, he used violence. Instead of using his rights, he used a weapon. Instead of using a baton, he used a weapon. That's why we're here today, members of the jury. That's why we, the United States government, charged this defendant with murder. And in doing so, we had to prove two things to you today beyond a reasonable doubt. That the defendant killed Senator Thomas Capella, and that he did so intentionally. Members of the jury, we met our burden. We proved our case. Now, before I continue, I want to respond to the defense because members of the jury, there are always going to be some questions in cases like this. When you have a planned and calculated and thought out crime, it's not like the criminal is trying to leave evidence for us behind after the crime. They can get rid of it. But members of the jury, what we have today are the defendant's slippers. What the defendant left behind. The cigarette. The defendant didn't consider. The bullet. The defendant didn't realize was on the ground. The sniper part, the defendant never wanted us to find. Members of the jury, your job is to examine the totality of the circumstances. And that's what you should use to come to your decision. So let's walk through those pieces of physical evidence, starting with the sniper. Because members of the jury, you learned today this wasn't a shot from up close. It was a shot from 600 yards. And you heard today that a 600-yard shot is not a walk in the park, members of the jury. It takes someone with experience, someone with training, someone skilled in the use of a sniper rifle, someone like the defendant. You heard today the defendant was the leading sniper in the Army. He had been a leading sniper for 8 years. He not only hit shots at 600 yards, but 900 yards and even 1,500 yards. He held a record, members of the jury, for this shot. It would be impossible for most people, but you heard today for the defendant, it would not be. If the defendant is just some innocent protester, as the defense would have you believe, why did he insist that his room be on the very top floor of that hotel? Why did he insist his room would be right next to the staircase that leads up to the rooftop? Why is there a sniper bullet found right on that rooftop? The same type of bullet that he used in the military. Why did he use a fake name and try to hide his identity, members of the jury? That's not an innocent protest. It's a criminal. Members of the jury, that leads us to the second. The cigarette. Because the defendant, he didn't just lie to the hotel clerk. He admitted on the stand today that he lied to the FBI about that cigarette. The FBI shows him that cigarette, gunshot residue all over it. And the FBI said, they asked him, explain. What does he say? I've never seen it. I've never touched it. I have no clue what that cigarette is. I have never been on the rooftop in my life. That is not mine. Then they show him the evidence, those fingerprints, that DNA evidence. And when that happens, members of the jury, the defendant changes his entire story. He throws what he said before out the window, and he admits he lied to the FBI. Members of the jury, this isn't a one-off thing. The defense actually admitted he lied to his military officers as well. That brings us to the truth. Because members of the jury, when you commit a crime like this, the defendant, he would want to dispose of the sniper rifle, right? It's not like he's going to leave it right on the rooftop for us to find. You'd want to dispose of the parts. And you did so in various locations. You heard the defendant was walking all around Philadelphia for hours. But in that time, the defendant slipped in an interview and told us that he visited a restaurant called Cleaver's. So we searched that restaurant, and what we found was a sniper part, a trigger shield, the same type of trigger shield that the defendant used in the military, the same type he's familiar with, a sniper rifle he wanted, his weapon of choice. It's lightweight, it's accurate, it never jams. That is what we found at the exact same location that the defendant visited after the shooting. Members of the jury, the defense, they'd have you believe, you know what? It's just a coincidence that we found his trigger shield of choice at the restaurant he visited. They would have you believe it's just a coincidence that the bullet he used frequently is up on that rooftop. They'd have you believe a coincidence that a cigarette with gunshot residue on it up on that rooftop has his fingerprints, has his DNA. Just a coincidence he has the motive to commit this crime, the skills to commit this crime. Just a coincidence he booked that room under a fake name, members of the jury, at some point. Coincidence after coincidence after coincidence is not reason. It's not a coincidence. It's a crime. To avoid the battle, he used it. So find the defendant. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense or closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed when you're ready.
May it please the court. The prosecution was required to give us answers. But did we get answers? or just more questions? Members of the jury, we heard throughout trial that they had all this evidence stacked against the defendant, Blake Crosby. But time and time again, we heard that the DNA evidence was lacking. Now, again, the prosecution's whole claim is hinging on the basis that Blake Crosby was a skilled marksman. He served time in the military, and that he was staying at the same hotel where allegedly the shot was fired from. But members of the jury, that does not make Blake Crosby an assassin. Now let's think about logic here. If the prosecution is saying that Blake Crosby was the one who assassinated Thomas Capello, I want you to think about this. Why was he so vocal about not liking Thomas Capello? He never hid his face from the rallies. He went to all of them leading up to July 4th. He walked around, he talked to people, he posted on social media his complaints about Thomas Capello, like so many others do. They post on social media about it. What would have really helped him if he did commit this heinous crime was secrecy. But Blake Crosby, he has nothing to hide. He was going to the rally to protest. We know that. We know that he checked into the Sonesta. We know that he smoked a cigarette on the rooftop. Members of the jury, this cigarette is the only DNA evidence connected to Mr. Crosby. He wasn't hiding the fact that he smokes a pack of cigarettes a day, and he wasn't hiding the fact that he smoked on July 3rd. Now, the prosecution is saying that his fingerprints were found. That's true, and that his DNA was found on this cigarette. But the prosecution also said that there was gun residue found on the cigarette. But what weren't they able to tell you about that gun residue, members of the jury? They weren't able to tell you when. When did that gun residue hit the cigarette? Sure, after the shot was fired, but that doesn't mean it was at the same time that the cigarette was being smoked on the roof. It doesn't mean that it was a day before, 2 days before. We have no idea when the cigarette was left in comparison to when that gun residue was found on. And then the prosecution said, well, we have a bullet. We have this bullet, and it's the same one that was found in the skull of Thomas Capello. But members of the jury, there's no DNA on this bullet. Members of the jury, there is no forensic evidence on this DNA. And then they said, well, then we found the trigger bullet in a dumpster in the city of Philadelphia. Again, members of the jury, no DNA evidence, no forensic evidence recovered. But they're saying it has to be Blake Crosby because he's the only one who hated Thomas Capello. Think about that, members of the jury. The only one who wasn't in favor of a political candidate? The only one who wasn't in favor of a political candidate who was openly anti-military? You heard from Mr. Crosby himself that there were other protesters at the rally protesting Thomas Capello's positions on the military. There was other military servicemen and women there. But the prosecution wants you to believe that Thomas Capello is the only one with the skill who could have made that shot. And we know that's not true based on the testimony. And I also want to talk about Special Agent DeVico's testimony. Now, Special Agent DeVico made it very clear. He said specifically that Mr. Crosby was very vocal about what he didn't like about Thomas Capello. But what he wasn't able to tell you about any of this was where's the murder weapon? What he wasn't able to tell you is why was it never recovered? What he wasn't able to tell you is where is the receipt? The receipts from a gun purchase, a sniper rifle purchase from Mr. Crosby. The ammunition that would match that sniper rifle from Mr. Crosby. No receipts, no credit card statements, no GPS data tracking Mr. Crosby in his every location. Where was that evidence? You see, members of the jury, it's clear that there were gaps. But the prosecution, they have some questions that were left unanswered. It's almost too easy to point the finger at someone who has a blemish on his military record and who has the skill. But where didn't they look? What didn't they consider? What didn't they find? And that's what we presented to you today. What they didn't find. One piece of DNA forensic evidence matching Blake Crosby. And again, not a crime to smoke. And certainly not a crime to smoke at the hotel you were staying at. Members of the jury, prosecution didn't find an assassin. They found a guest at a hotel. Prosecution had a burden of proof. They needed to prove to you that Blake Crosby killed Thomas Capella beyond reasonable doubt. And that it was deliberate and intentional. They have failed. We ask that you find Blake Crosby not guilty for murder. Thank you.
Check how much time I have remaining for rebuttal.
Yes.
You have 40 seconds. Defense counsel got up here on opening statement, direct examination, cross-examination, and closing argument and said over and over again, this defendant has nothing to hide, but members of the jury, we know that is not true. You learned on cross-examination, the defendant hid his identity when he booked that hotel room, and he lied to the FBI, hiding what actually happened. Members of the jury, he's hiding what actually happened from you today. The defense counsel says we're relying on assumptions. A cigarette with his DNA covered in gunshot residue, that's not an assumption, it's a fact. The trigger shield, it's a fact. The bullet, it's a fact. The physical evidence, it's fact, members of the jury. So find the defendant. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. There's no rebuttal with the defense, right?
Not for the defense, Your Honor.
All right, well, that'll conclude our trial.